Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Joyce Kyles. I am the founder and CEO of Walking Into a New Life Incorporated. I'm also the founder and CEO of Joyce Kyles Consulting, LLC. And it is my privilege, my honor to be able to present to some and introduce to others none other than our facilitator for this next hour. Her name is Coach Sherilyn Payton, and I'd like to just read a little bit bio about her to you, and then I'm just going to turn it on over to her and let her do what she does best. So Sherilyn Payton, she, her, hers, is the lead coach and consultant at Payton Place. She is a trainer, human development specialist, Standards for Excellence licensed nonprofit consultant, and a certified master life coach who specializes in community coaching. In her community coaching role, her primary objective is to promote effective, equitable leadership and collaboration. Her practice focuses on meeting the growth and development needs of visionary community leaders, minority women-owned business enterprises, and nonprofit professionals whose work centers the marginalized, disenfranchised, and under-resourced. Every aspect of her work and practice is justice-centric and in the context of multiracial, intergenerational, and socio-politically diverse networks. Sherilyn believes that every human interaction has the power to cause harm or to promote growth and healing. We each get to decide which. And so without further ado, I'd like to again present to some, introduce to others, my friend, my colleague, and my personal coach, none other than Sherilyn Payton. Sherilyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I appreciate you, and you know that. Welcome everyone to this space. With every interaction, it is my intention to create not safe space because only you know what is safe for you, but a sacred space and a space of belonging where you can feel connected and to be able to tell your story, share your truths, and be engaged in a meaningful way. So even though this is a short session, Joyce, I do need you to keep me on time because I think we are off maybe by 5 or 10 minutes.
Yes, absolutely. I will.
Don't let me mess this up. So I appreciate you as my partner in this work in this moment. So I just want to welcome each of you and to say, we're going to share this space. I will pause throughout. I want to reserve your questions to the end. Write them down. Joyce will help me gather that. I'm going to speak some of my own truths in this space, and I'm going to share the stories of Black and Brown people and the experiences that they are having in the world. So I'm going to go ahead and get started now. So racial justice, intervention, and prevention as a three-pronged approach to advocacy. As you all heard in the opening session, it's almost impossible to do one or the other without the foundation of understanding racial justice. So I want to, well, my clicker clearly isn't working, so we'll do this the good old-fashioned way. I think I need some batteries. But anyway, we talk about anti-racism and the approach. And one of the things that, how to be an anti-racist, Ibram Kendi has introduced us to is racial inequity is a problem of bad policy, not bad people. We often center how the person and their behavior is affecting us and impacting us in our outcomes. But if we would look at policy, legislation, and so forth, we would see where a lot of the position that people take and even the dogma and indoctrination of some religious institutions and things like that, that it has played and how it has impacted us as a community and as a society. So just remember, as we talk about racial justice, we're not just talking about the behavior of any group of individuals. We're talking about systemic impact. We're talking about where the real power is, and that's in policymaking and legislation and so forth, that needs to change in order for us to be well and seen and heard in meaningful ways. So, although intervention and prevention have long been a part of our approach to addressing issues around domestic and other forms of violence, state-sanctioned violence, no matter the violence, racial justice has not been a consideration. So I'm inviting us to think about how we will move forward with that understanding. So we have really two main objectives through this breakout, and that is, in this session, we're going to intentionally center Black people's stories and lived experiences as the impetus for integrating a racial justice-centric approach into our work and mission. I'm going to pause for a second. I want my interpreters and those, I tend to talk fast when I get excited. I was excited before, but I remembered in the room there was interpreting taking place, and this one I'm kind of narrowed by my presentation, so I'm forgetting. So just bear with me, and please feel free to remind me to slow down. Yes, our stories, as you've heard previously, as the impetus for integrating racial justice into this work. And then what we're going to also do is consider practical ways to use this approach to recognize and disrupt anti-Blackness and racism inside of the work, the institutions. A lot of what our panelists said earlier has to do with how the institution views the individuals. And so I want to say that we have to kind of get back to that, how we're thought about as a whole, in order to get people to shift their mindset. So I want to talk about some of the factors that we need to consider as to why it's important. I'm going to start there. So first and foremost, anti-Blackness, racism, and discrimination persist. We have all of these, and even you've seen it more with the disparities in healthcare and outcomes around COVID and things like that. It's been amplified for our viewing and for us to think about it in new ways. Everyone is seeing it, but not everyone is responding in a meaningful way to what is happening. I won't say appropriate, I'll just say meaningful. Again, performative acts and statements are not helpful to the cause. So another thing to consider is that historically, racist systems, institutions, and policy-making bodies, they not only have existed, but they still exist. And here's what I mean. If the advocacy agency or the advocating institution was founded in the 1960s, for example, right? And they have not revisited their mission and vision and strategy around how they help or integrated equity and an equity practice, not an equity statement, but an equity practice into the work, it's difficult to get the work done in a meaningful way. And the other thing, race, power, and privilege impact outcomes for victims. We know this. The data, the studies, everything out there points us to this understanding, but we're acting as if we don't know it. And so I'm encouraging us to think about it. And then finally, disproportionate rates of re-victimization among Black people specifically. I know that we talk BIPOC, but I want to talk about how Black people specifically are re-victimized through their stories. So I'm gonna keep this moving. I'm gonna share just a few stats with you. So something that happens in Black people's lives consistently is, so you see here this study, it says Black women and girls face higher rates of sexual violence at a younger age and experience intimate partner homicide at a rate of 4.4% per 100,000 of the population, a rate higher than all other ethnicities, according to the CDC. I'm going to pause and interject something here for your consideration. When studies that have been done over time reflect that young Black girls are sexualized at a much earlier age and treated as adult, as if they know about their bodies and sex and all of these things, without the benefit of knowing any of that. They're treated as if they know that because of how we are viewed in our Blackness. Our body becomes the vehicle for the harm, and then it has to carry the harm in various ways. So the invitation for little Black girls to be seen as women in some ways and to welcome violence has been historically to our demise. Like, it just is perpetually harmful. So again, Black women experience significantly higher rates of psychological abuse, which is my story, including humiliation, insults, name calling, coercive control, than do women overall. And then advocates, which is where the space we're in, report that COVID-19, the pandemic, has triggered an increase in violence against Black women. I would ask us to think about also why, what's happening in isolation, and to think about, like, yeah, what's the real story behind that? I'm going to invite us to think about some things, and hopefully we'll have good time to spend some time in Q&A. And Black women face particularly high risk of being killed at the hands of a man. A 2015 Violence Policy Center study finds that Black women were 2.5 times more likely to be murdered by men than their white counterparts. So let's pause for a second. I need to breathe. So I'm just going to take a physical breath before we look at the rest of this. So just pause for a moment. Okay. So a lot of what is happening is this moving away from justice in an effort to move towards it, because people are rationalizing their own discomfort with the harm that they have caused. And so I just invite you, we're going to talk first about racial justice as one of the prongs. And here's a quote from James Baldwin: "Ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have." The reason I'm saying this at this point is because I'm going to begin now to share some Black folks' stories and lived experiences with you. And I'm going to give you a chance to process it and to decide what you think, feel, and know intuitively about these stories. So the first story, I was 12 years old the first time I was hit by a male. I was violently punched in the mouth on a dare and still have the scar on the inside of my lip from where it was busted open. 4 years later, I was punched in the face again by another male after defending one of my friends he was arguing with. In both instances, no one helped me. This is a story of Frida Grant. It's a story taken from For Harriet. And you can find more stories like that if you care to. This is a story I'm bringing into, from the news, I'm bringing into your awareness. 13 Black women ranging in age from 17 to 58 were sexually assaulted, raped, and threatened by police officer Daniel Hortzclaw. Prosecutors said he deliberately preyed on vulnerable Black women from low-income neighborhoods. One victim stated, "I didn't think that no one would believe me." Madison Moore, a 6-year-old Black girl, was accused of allegedly stealing candy, was handcuffed and left under a stairwell by the school's boiler for more than an hour, according to her mother, Marlena Wardlow. So I want you to see what you see within these stories. You see children being treated as adults, a 6-year-old here in this case. You see the experience of violence at an early age at the hands of a male. You see a dismissing of story not being heard, right? She says, I didn't think in the story, in the Daniel Hortzclaw instance, if you're in trouble, say you're an addicted mother or whatever your case may be. I'm dealing with some things right now around the fetal assault law and things like that. If you're addicted, are you likely to tell on your perpetrator for fear of being believed? Are you likely? And so that's why these stories are important, but particularly for people who wake up in Black and brown skin every day, because there are some other challenges that come as you're waking up with already the possibility, understanding that there could be harm just simply because your skin and your color has been weaponized. If this is the weapon, and I can't think of the exact quote right now, is this is what you're afraid of, I'm never disarmed, so I'm always at risk of harm. I'm going to link what we just heard and saw in the form of these stories of Black women to some other images. But let's answer the question, what can we do? What can we do for prevention? What does that look like? And I'm gonna just bring back in some of what you've already heard in the first session with our amazing panelists. And I'm just gonna invite you to decide what you would like to do and what discussions you would like to have with partners, allies, and I always quote allies because who decides what an ally is? Folks who call themselves allies are often not. But I want us to think about what we can do. So this first image and statement around what can do, address racist policy and practices which perpetuate anti-Blackness. And I'm sure everyone in this room can think of at least one example or policy, and I'll just start. Policies around what's professional in terms of hair and presentation of self in the workplace. locks and braids and blue hair, whatever it may be, no matter how brilliant the individual may be, no matter male or female, no matter what, when an organization has a policy around those kind of aesthetics, you know what's targeted there. It doesn't affect someone's ability to do their job. So what's the point, right? Is it a distraction? And even to say, anyway, I'm going to keep moving forward. Address physical and social and economic barriers to services. So I'll give you so even though this is a person with limited mobility in the picture here, I will say that one of the issues when you're inviting people to an agency for services and your role is intervention, prevention, ultimately advocacy, and you say, well, you have to come down and they've got 4 kids, they've got no money, and you're saying, well, can somebody bring you? That's a barrier to access. I, as a fully functioning, thriving adult, would get irritated when people would say, oh, come out to so-and-so county and meet with us. And I'm like, how do you know I even have gas to get there? A lot of assumptions being made about my capacity. Maybe I look a certain way, but at the time, people didn't know I was going through some financial challenges or whatever. But to assume that if you offer me access, that I can automatically get access, I can't sometimes. So just considerations. Challenge anti-Black stereotypes and biases. A lot of us have been in conversation and difficult conversation having in these awkward power dynamics where someone is saying something and you know that it is an anti-Black or even racist statement, but you can't speak to it. And I'm not even talking about call it out, but you can't question it even because perhaps that's your funder, right? There is a risk involved and often consequence to challenge any anti-Black racist behavior. But stereotypes are one of those things you can ask a question around. Joyce and I are both coaches. And one of the things I would ask is that true? When someone would make a statement around bias, around all women this, or all Black people this, or all, and I would say, well, is that your experience? Like what, tell me about it. It starts, and that's how you get people to thinking also. The other thing that you can do around prevention is to promote, rather than just saying what you don't want, promote cultural awareness and talk about the beauty of Blackness, even if you're not Black. Celebrate with us. We invite you to not co-opt or not, take our work, take our thoughts, we're tired of that. But we also, we do invite you to say, Black is beautiful. We invite you to just say it out your mouth. Because it is in the reason. And so I want to clarify something right here. For this debate about Black Lives Matter to All Lives Matter, we wouldn't need a Black Lives Matter if all lives really did matter, right? So what we're saying is, we have been taught, and which is a segue to the next slide, that Black is not beautiful. In fact, it's quite ugly, and unless it is useful in the service of someone else's needs or financial empowerment or whatever, moving their needle on their wealth. Black is beautiful in terms of, yes, we can pick your cotton and we need you. But is it beautiful when it doesn't serve you? So promote cultural awareness and the things that are, when people are celebrating their celebrations around their faith, and it happens to be in the origins of Blackness, African-centered or whatever it may be, Kwanzaa, whatever. I'm not asking you to put on a kenta anything and show up cultural appropriation. That's not what I'm asking you to do. Don't celebrate for us, but with us in a meaningful way, in a way that makes sense. Show up and ask us about the ways in which you can support that don't diminish us. So value, respect, and protect Black lives. So in advocacy spaces, it's often assumed that people will step up and speak up. But often, again, because of the funder, or because, again, so much racialized policy and practice can put your funding at risk. A lot of times you're quietly advocating when sometimes just to speak up is really a very necessary process. So value, respect, and protect Black lives means sometimes speaking up in a space where you would otherwise be quiet and silent. There's another quote, and I think it's Martin Luther King Jr., who said, at some point, your silence, okay, I can't think of it. But anyway, the silence is the issue, especially when you have capacity or power or privilege that you can use to help protect people. So again, throughout the sessions, we've talked about normalizing the stories of people. I'm sorry, Joyce, is this time check? Have I not gone fast enough? Are you giving me a halfway point? Or what am I doing?
No, you're perfectly fine. I'm just able to show my face.
Okay, good.
Just been monitoring.
I'm glad to see you there. I just want to make sure I'm going at a good pace.
You're good. You have about 20 minutes. You're good.
Okay, great. Okay. So I really do want to give us time for some Q&A, and I'm moving pretty quickly. Hopefully I'm not moving too fast for the interpreters, but recognizing, and reporting violence, and encouraging help-seeking behavior. So I'm going to go back to what Molly said earlier in the panel. Whether it's the 5th time or the 50th time, I've heard people say, okay, that's enough. I'm not letting her in anymore. I'm not helping her again. I'm not any of the whatever. Part of normalizing, recognizing, and even helping around these issues is just recognizing it is a process getting out. It seems simple to you because you've never had to do it. But the amount of pain, just disconnectedness from one's reality, all of the cognitive things that happen when you're living in a trauma, don't make it that simple. So I will just encourage you to say to someone who is left for the umpteenth time, don't stop asking for help. I'm going to be here. If I'm not here, there's always going to be someone here. So as an agency, making sure that, so when we don't have resources, maybe there's a referral, but don't stop the help and encourage help-seeking behavior, because isolation is a tool that perpetrators use to ultimately end the life of many of their victims. Just don't forget that. I purposely introduced this picture of Satoya Brown to you, to the re-victimization piece. If you are listening to a story in the news or a physical person sitting in front of you, and in this story, someone is saying to you, this now 21-year-old person who has has done harm, they murdered their abuser. And then they follow with a statement like, they were in this situation for the last 9 years. I want you to just take a moment, process that. This person was a baby, a child, when the abuse began. But now all that's being centered in this justice system is her actions, not the actions of those who that she wasn't protected, that she wasn't allowed to live as a child and enjoy the safety and security of a home, whether she was in foster system, whatever it may be. There was violence perpetuated, and people normalized this grown person, these grown individuals, full adults, and her with no real agency of her own. They normalized seeing a 16-year-old and a 15-year-old with an adult man in a relationship. I want us to just pause for a minute. If this was your daughter, if this was your sister, if this was your anything, so you're asking how that was prevention, right? To think about ways, speaking up. I was on a trip to Vegas with some friends, and I saw these young ladies walking along the boardwalk. And up here, there was a would-be perpetrator watching them, recording them. They were unaware of that. But as an observer, I said, listen, babies, listen. Y'all are not paying attention. Y'all are in a strange environment. You don't know. And I said, this man has watched y'all for the last 3 blocks. So they don't have to listen to me. And I just went on about my way. But that moment of observation caused them to step into some care for themselves, to say, oh my God, we were not aware. So I just want to bring that to your attention. So these are things we can do. It doesn't, what's going to happen? If I say something, they may end up in a better situation. If I say nothing, they could end up being harmed. It's like, that's none of my business. It is my business. So I'm again just giving us some intervention and prevention strategies, just things to think about. This is not all. But listen to and believe the stories and experiences of Black folks. And when you lean towards not believing them, ask yourself why. Make visible the experiences of Black people. Attribution matters. Where did you hear the story? Where did you get the poem? Where did you get when you tell somebody else's story, you say their names. Give credit where credit is due. Honor the hard work and labor of Black people, Black women. Support and encourage the creation of BIPOC spaces. I remember, when I hear somebody say, well, why y'all need y'all's own magazine? Have you seen the others? Do you see me in them? Jet magazine, Essence magazine, Ebony magazine. Why do y'all need y'all's own? Where are you seeing me other than here? And still to this day, I ask that question. And so BIPOC spaces, when there is opportunity for affinity groups that are specific to Black anything, don't push back. We don't need that at all. It's not helpful. And then 4, I particularly and specifically chose Felicia Rashad for this, because hold all offenders accountable. I don't care how much we have loved them and they're putting bops or whatever over the years. When they have perpetuated harm, we're not saying, murder we're saying they need healing and help too. We're not saying that they don't need the support. But accountability and compassion can live in the same house. Quote Coach Payton right there. Accountability and compassion can live in the same house. So we can hold people accountable and not harm them necessarily. We want to ensure that this behavior doesn't continue. We have a right to protect people in every aspect, but particularly women of color, which are the least protected among all of humanity. I can't speak, I've never been an Indigenous woman, but I can imagine that it's similar for them as well. They're just less visible and not counted as much. So I will say, hold all offenders accountable. And stand with Black victims and survivors. We don't need you to be our voice. We need you to stand with us while our voice is cracking and shaking. Just give us a moment to catch our breath. We don't need you to speak for us in every instance. If there is an occasion where, now if my jaw is broken and that's a result of the violence that I've experienced or whatever it may be, then yes. But if I am capable, give me a moment. Give me an opportunity to speak on my own behalf. Invite me, actually. That too is advocacy. Invite me to speak on my own behalf. There's sometimes where I may need your voice, but most of the time, I have my own. And then address all forms of abuse of power. So because someone has more resources, we've got 10 minutes. We're actually done. We're right at, hey. Okay, sorry, had to do a little celebrating there. Address all forms of abuse. So if you have any power, privilege, or influence, I invite you to use it to address clear abuse of power. You know of agencies that are skewing the numbers, that are giving resources more over here to particular groups because they have an affinity for those groups versus these groups of people. You know it's happening. And there's ways, if you want to remain anonymous, to report those kinds of abuses. And you don't have to lose your funding. You don't have to. I'm just challenging us all to step into the work in a meaningful way, to be more present with these truths, these realities. Like, we know what's going on, but a lot of what's keeping us from doing something meaningful, transformative, is fear. Fear of loss of position, power, resources. You finally got invited to the little clique, the little table, and you don't want to lose your spot. I understand. But is that working? And are you sleeping well at night, knowing what you know and not doing anything about it? So those are my questions. That's my time. And I'm going to ask you all, I'm going to invite you all, I'm going to give you a couple of prompt questions. And I know that if you all, I haven't been paying attention to the chat, Joyce is helping me with that. But if you have some questions about anything that I've said, I invite you to bring those questions into the room. But my questions are two. The first is, because we're talking about how to use this, what we now know, in a practical way to make change. So my questions are, how can you use what you now know to disrupt anti-blackness and racist practices? What can you do? And there are 16 people in this room, with Joyce and I included. So 14 of you have an idea, a thought, an opinion. And I invite you to unmute yourselves, put it in the chat, whatever. Let's just have a dialogue, a back and forth, talk about it, what have you. So that's the first question. How can you? And I invite you to be succinct. We've got about 8 minutes, which I think is a good amount of time to address these two questions. And the second question is, how can you use your power and or privilege to disrupt anti-blackness and racism? And I'm going to clarify something. Even those of us at the quote unquote bottom of the totem pole, everyone has some power. None of us is omnipotent, or none of us has absolute power in this advocacy space. But I invite you to unmute yourselves, raise your hand, however we want to do that, and share one way in which you, individually, not your organization, you can respond to this.
Okay, Matthew has his hand raised. Matthew, you go ahead, floor is yours.
I mean, for me, one way that I tackle is I don't play along, and sometimes it's not always the safest or best idea to have like a full conversation of like, that's some racist garbage, and like, we're not going to do that. But I had a coworker a while ago, just to kind of give an example of this, who was a big fan of like god awful racist jokes, and I would just kind of like, he'd tell it like expecting me to laugh, expecting me to play along, you know, I'm white, he's white, and kind of like no expression, stare at him.
Yes.
Start to backpedal, like, oh, like no, it's like, and I looked at him, I'm like, no, you know that's messed up, don't justify it to me, don't do that stuff, because like one day someone is going to be a lot less nice than I am. Like, know your audience, dude, and like, that's not okay. It's 2021, come on now.
Thank you, Matthew, for that. And that is a definite one. So again, when we talked about these bias and these stereotypes, that those racist jokes falls along that. So Matthew, thank you for that.
And we do have in the chat, Morgan said to speak up when I see something that isn't right. Kind of to Matthew's point, unfortunately, I have privilege in these systems and I need to listen. I need to call in racist policies and practices when I see them and make a change.
I'm gonna, Morgan, thank you very much for that. I wanna give you a strategy, and I just wanna say this. The allies that I work with, who I truly do call allies, I say to them, if you need language, if you need some support in articulating, let me help you, let me coach you. Like right now, I do a lot of coaching for white-led organizations around their equity statements. And I ask them, what does that look like? I like the words, but what does that look like for you? And so that may be in a meeting or something saying, this policy is not inclusive, and just simply leaving it for discussion. And they may say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, how would this affect da, da, da? And I encourage a lot of organizations to do blind resumes so that you're not screening out Shaniqua because you don't like her name, right? So these are practices for me in the work that I do to help organizations recognize where they are being anti-Black and racist.
Okay, and we do have a couple of more comments.
Okay.
We're down to about 5 minutes. So Karima Dillard she said, offering a counter narrative whenever dominant narratives take up the majority of the airspace in public and private spaces.
Absolutely, absolutely. Karima, I invite you to unmute, and I would like for you to share an example. If you are not comfortable, I descend the order or request or whatever. But if you are comfortable sharing, because I have a plethora of stories that align with that statement, would you be willing?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do this pretty often, and not just around racial injustice, but offering all kinds of counter narratives. The one that I can think of most recently is I was talking to a guy who was doing an assessment of some trees in an area, and he was lamenting that he didn't have enough people to work in the lumber yard. And he just kept saying, you know, people don't want to work, people don't want to work. And I was like, okay, well, let's reframe that. It's not that people don't want to work right now. There are so many reasons why people are pulling out of the workforce, or people are demanding better pay or better working conditions, et cetera. And it kind of shut him up. Like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to demonize people for choosing to or demanding what they deserve. Housing is another one where I'm often having to remind folks, when we're talking about gentrification and displacement, that we're not just talking about economic gentrification in economic terms, but also racial terms. And, what does it mean when somebody moves into an historically Black community and folks who have lived there for generations are displaced, and giving those folks a name and a platform to talk about that experience. It's just constantly offering reframes, constantly offering another way to look at something, whether it's in my family or in my workspace or public spaces and policy, et cetera. Just offering that counter narrative, always being ready with the counter narrative.
Thank you, Karima. That is one that I bring up often, and just had the conversation with a client yesterday who said, in our search, we can't find an African-American thus and so. And I said, well, where are you looking? And what does your network look like? And all of these questions, I'm saying, and their website is very, 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 very white. It can't be any whiter. So I talk about creating space of welcoming and belonging before you have to. Like in this space, do I see myself at all? Or am I to assume the invitation is to other and not me? Or am I the other? And so thank you, Karima.
And just know that time is winding down, and I have already been informed that we will start moving and transitioning back into the main room.
Joyce?
So we have time for one question, and we'll wrap up there. So in the event that it gets cut off, just know it's because you've automatically been moved back into the main space.
Do we have one more question in the chat box? I don't know. I wasn't paying attention at all.
Oh, no. Just other additional comments.
Can you read those?
I would like to lift the last comment that was made. I think we do have time for that. That I speak with my coworkers of color, and this is from Megan. I speak with my coworkers of color and ask them the best way that I can support them at work during meetings, and follow through by supporting them in the ways they stated would be helpful. I also try to point us towards using resources, speakers, etc., who are POC or persons of color, instead of only using white resources, speakers, and etc. And then Caitlin also said, I will ask why anti-Black and racist practices or privileges continue to exist, and calling them for what they are, and asking others to join me in addressing these issues. We also will have a working document that all of these questions and comments will be placed in for you all to be able to view later.
I appreciate you all. We're about to be sent back to the main room now. And I just want to say thank you so much for attending this session, and being attentive to me as the facilitator. And thank you so much, Joyce.
Thank you so much for agreeing to join us. It is my personal and professional privilege to share this space with you. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And again, you will be placed in the breakout room if you haven't already, in the main stage if you haven't already been kicked out. Thank you, Sherilyn, for all you continue to do in our community. You are appreciated more than you know. Thank you.